Hey guys, welcome to another video. So today we're going to be rebuilding the M50 for our E36 drift car. So the reason we've actually built the head first is we couldn't continue on the bottom end just because we were missing these little things. I'll throw up a photo. They're the oil squirters for the bottom end. So they actually go in this little slot here, like so. This is under the main bearing. And if you don't have those, you pretty much have no oil pressure. So luckily that we realized that we were missing them. It did take about 6 weeks to be able to source some and resolve the issue, but we're back on track now, ready to build the bottom end.
So just a quick update, we aren't going to be using the 3-litre crank pistons and rods. Unfortunately, there's too much of a lip on top of the bore. I'll throw up a photo now. But basically that would just damage the piston rings. We need to go to oversized pistons, and unfortunately that's just out of the scope of this project. So we'll stick with the 2.5 litre rotating assembly. Should be plenty of power for what we're after.
So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check the clearances for the main bearings with the crankshaft. So we just got a bit of plastic gauge. We're going to dummy the crankshaft in the block and check all the bearing clearances. So we're just going to get started by chucking in the oil squirters, and we're going to put the bottom of the main bearings in, then we'll pop the crank in. Just making sure the bearings that go on the caps have 2 slots there, and the ones that go on the block actually only have 1, so you can't mix them up. Also, there's the bearing with the thrush washer, so that's the second one from the gearbox side. Also just going to put assembly lube on the bearings, that way when it starts up there's a bit of lubricant there. Just going to get our plastic gauge and pop on the strip on all of the bearing surfaces. Now we're just going to torque them up to a spec. So now we're just going to get the plastic gauge, I guess, and we're just going to make sure that all the marks on the crank are in line with the spec, which is 2000. So we just verified it using the main caps, and it looks like everything's in spec, so we're all good to continue. So we'll just go and wipe down the plastic gauge with oil, that gets it off, and then we'll continue the final assembly. So there's been a bit of a change of plans. So we've actually damaged one of the main bearings. I'll throw up a photo, but there's basically a bit of a chunk taken out when we've put on the plastic gauge to check the bearing clearance. I believe what's happened is the plastic gauge was contaminated with something, I don't know, some crap, and that's caused the crank to dig into the main bearing when we've tightened it up to check the clearance. I was umming and ahhing whether to continue or not, but we've actually managed to pick up a fresh set of bearings, brand new, just off Marketplace. So we're able to continue, which is amazing. So we'll crack onto it. So it looks like the main caps that we got are actually slightly different. The main issue is the notch is actually too big to fit inside the main cap itself. So it's too big for that hole there. So we'll try to crack on and just not do up that main cap. We also picked up this angular torque gauge to help better torque the mains, so the spec is 50 degrees. now just going to rotate the crank. We'll just put the crank pulley bolt on and you can see it's turning nice and easy, which is what we want to see. Just going to flip the engine over, start dropping in the new pistons, and then we'll do up the individual rod caps. Alright, so the next stage of the process is going to be to file down the piston rings. So these go on, there's 2 on each piston. So the way we're going to do that is we pop it into the bore. Like so. They're really finicky. And to make sure it's completely level, I've just got a piston here with the one of the top rings off. Just going to pop that in the bore until it sits on the ring, so you know it's perfectly flat. Then we're going to get our feeler gauges and chuck it into the gap there until we can measure the exact gap, and obviously we'll have to open them up. So what we do is we'll pop them out. We'll come over to our piston ring filer. We'll turn this, which will slowly grind down the piston ring, and what that does, it'll close up the gap there until we get to the desired piston ring gap. So we'll pop it on time lapse now because it's going to be quite a long time. We'll get stuck into it. We're just going to continue with doing the pistons. So we've got one piston here, we've replaced the rings there, and we're just going to put it in this compression tool and pop it in the cylinder. This is the cylinder, the piston for cylinder 1. Also, a tip I found online is actually wiping the bores with automatic transmission fluid. It really helps to clear it out, just because there's a lot of stuff that's left over from the honing of the block. So unfortunately ran into a snag. We have M5430 rod bolts, which are actually about 5mm too short, so they're not long enough to grab the threads on the rod. So we've had to order some ARPs. They're not that much dearer than just getting OEM bolts, and they're a lot quicker. Trying to get this done on a time crunch, so we'll crack on and do the rest of the pistons, and we'll just come back and replace all the rod bolts with new stuff when we get it. So our pistons are in. We'll just rotate it by hand. Definitely rotates pretty nicely. No weird feeling. Now, it is a pretty common issue that the M5430 has issues with harmonics, which leads to the nut on the oil pump backing out. So we were going to use a 3-litre crank, so to get around that we were going to use a brand new oil pump chain as well as a brand new sprocket. We also are going to be installing a tensioner for the chain. Isn't really necessary because we are going to use the B25 crank, so we're just going to install it anyway just to be safe, because we have the parts, might as well use them, and that should mean that our oil pump is pretty much bulletproof, hopefully. Alright, so our ARP rod bolts have actually just arrived. So what we're going to do is we're going to flip the engine over and then we'll torque up the rod bolts for the final time, and we'll put the rest of the windage tray back together on the bottom end. So now we're going to crack on and put the oil pump on. We'll have to take a pickup off just so we can put the girdle on later when the main bearing comes. But we'll put the oil pump on, we'll put the oil pump gear and attach that all so it's ready to go. We're also going to be Loctiting the oil pump nut with red Loctite just so it doesn't back off. We have the tensioner, we have the new chain, so there's not really much slack. So I'm pretty confident, and it's only a 2.5 litre, so I'm pretty confident the oil pump nut's not going to come off. Now just getting the block ready to accept the head gasket. We've just replaced the dowel pins, so we're just going to lightly hit them in. Pop them in the freezer just so they're a little bit easier to work with. Just going to give the head one last clean. So just going to test fit the head gasket just to see how it fits. So it fits pretty well. What we'll do is we're going to put the head on. We'll put sealant just in here and here between where the timing chain cover meets the block, and then we'll lower the head on and we'll put the ARP studs in through the head. Sweet, head's on. So now we're going to install our ARP head studs. So the first step is just to screw them into the block. So we just had to go to Super Cheap to get a 12mm socket to do the head studs. So we've got that now. We're going to install the washers and install the nuts. So now just going to tighten up the head. So we're doing it in 3 stages, starting from the center of the head and working our way outwards evenly. So we get cracking. The head's all torqued down now. It was quite the workout. It took a lot of force to tighten those bolts. Next, we're just going to get the lifter trays and the lifters and chuck them in the head. So we're just trying to get the lifters out of the buckets. So a little trick that we've learned is, instead of trying to just get them out with a pair of mole grips, you just whack them on the ground here. Get a piece of wood. Oop, she's been a bit stubborn. And just give it a massive hit. There you go, she's all out. So once we've taken the lifters off the bucket, we just take the lifters apart. It's these 3 parts here, and just drain all the oil out. And then what we do is we just put it back together, pop it back into the bucket, and then pop them back into the trays, and we just bleed any excess oil out. That way when the engine starts up for the first time, they'll refill with oil and then automatically adjust the valve lash to what we need for the cams. So the next step is we're going to install the lifter buckets and the lifter trays. Good little trick is we're just going to use a piece of cardboard to hold the buckets in the tray, and then once we put the tray in the right space, we're going to pull it out, and then they should be all in the right spot. See how we go. There we go, and now we'll just pull the cardboard. All good, easy peasy. So it's now time to install our camshafts. So the cams that we're going with is the intake cam is from an M54 B30, so that's a 3-litre engine, and the exhaust cam is actually the intake camshaft of the non-Vanos version of our engine. So basically it's done that way so that it's the same or similar lift and duration. Because our engine only has Vanos on the intake side, we can only use the double Vanos cam on the intake side, and that's why we had to go for the non-Vanos cam on the exhaust side. So we're just going to pop the cams in now. Like when we took them apart, we're just going to start with the center cap and just slowly tighten them down evenly. That way we don't end up bending the cams or anything strange like that. So we're now going to install all the timing gear. So we're just going to install the pulley, then we'll install the cam gears. It's a little bit tricky with the timing just because the exhaust cam is actually an intake cam. So I'm probably just going to time lapse the whole thing and look up how to do it because it is a pretty tricky process. But once it's done, I'll let you know how I go. So we've just managed to time the engine. So I'm not even going to pretend that that was really quick. It actually took quite a while. So we've actually got the engine at TDC right now. You can see the timing marks do not line up at all. So that's because we're using the intake cam on the exhaust, and we've actually chucked a 4-degree advance on the intake, which should give us good mid-range and a bit of low-range torque. What's really helped is we've got these 3D printed tools, so that sets the timing completely correct, and like I said before, chucked a 4-degree advance on the intake cam. We've also off camera just rebuilt the Vanos, put new seals in it and pushed it onto the engine, so she's good to go. Alright, so now the engine's timed, we're going to pop the valve cover off. First we've just got the intake cam cover, so we'll pop that bad boy on. Just before we pop the valve cover gasket on, the manual calls for RTV on the sides here, as well as where the Vanos unit meets the head. Also got some brand new rubber grommets to go onto the bolts for the valve cover, so we'll pop those in. Now we're just going to flip the engine over and we'll start doing that main bearing cap again. So it looks like we done goofed. We didn't pick up a oil pickup gasket that goes here. Not really confident to use the old one, so we'll just have to grab a new one when we can. So we just got a new gasket, so we're good to continue and chuck the oil pickup on. Alright, so we're just going to put the accessory drive back on, and we're going to put the oil filter housing on. Just got enlisted the help of Pete, so we'll be able to smash it out real quick. Easy.
Hell yeah.
That's where we're going to leave it for today. We've got the intake manifold, wiring harness, and all the accessories back on the engine. Pretty much the next job is just to get it off the stand, get the gearbox on, and then chuck it back in the car. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one. Cheers.